Tony, I'm curious as to your list, and this is your opinion, but I'm curious as to your list of who you would consider a super trainer right now.
I was asked the same question. You you referenced Tom Ryan, and as some who follow my Twitter account know, I had a recent discussion with Tom Ryan that I thought was good. It was cordial. It was useful, and I give him a lot of credit because he is clearly a Baffert supporter. Right. And the vast majority of that type have a tendency to go the ad hominem route, and he did not, and engaged me in a good discussion. So he asked me back on the first of the month what constitutes a quote super trainer, and although I didn't come up with a list, in some sense, I did say this. That in 2023, Todd Pletcher, Brad Cox, Chad Brown, Bob Baffert, Steve Asmussen, and Bill Mott won 38% of the 440 graded races run in the United States and 57% of the grade 1 races. So this is one way of getting at the answer to the question. Of course, I could also take a look at the number of starts, the number of wins, and so on. And maybe then, the list would expand to some extent. And it includes, under using different criteria, it would include trainers who are not household names for those who are not in the game, like, say, Jamie Ness, who saddles a lot of horses and that kind of thing. Well, I think that those kind of trainers are also problematic given the numbers, but I think that it's a more difficult and complex problem with the high-profile trainers who are dominating the major racetracks and the graded races, the grade 1 races, as those numbers illustrate. I think that it is a serious problem, and I also, both of you made really excellent points and have really added a lot to what I started out with on this topic. The one thing I want to add is that I think that one of the silly complaints, or if you even want to dignify it by calling it an argument, that, this is America, it's capitalism, and we have a right to give our horses to whoever we want, and those trainers have a right to take as many horses as they want, et cetera, et cetera. That's not, I don't consider that to be a serious argument. And the simple reason that I say that is because a big part of the reason why the major sports in the U.S., Major League Baseball, the National Basketball Association, the National Football League, have been so wildly successful is because they have used, if you want to use loaded words, a form of socialism in how they restrict salaries and so on. They have attempted to create at least some sort of semblance of parity in their leagues because they know that it's crucial to keeping interest and expanding interest in their products. And the racing industry has done the opposite. It has allowed increased concentration of not just numbers of horses, but quality of horses over several decades now. And I don't believe, of course, I'm not oversimplifying it and saying it's the only variable, but I don't believe that it could ever be considered a coincidence that the trajectory of the racing industry over the last 20 or 30 years has been precisely the opposite of the trajectory of those major sports. I think this is a significant reason why.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Tony, go ahead, Jared.
No, I was just gonna add like the idea of having like a 2-year-old draft is really funny to me. Like at the OVS March sale, and I just wanted to add one more thing, and I just use West Point as an example again because I think we're a microcosm of the business. We have horses all over the country at a variety of different price points, and we don't have that many horses with super trainers. We have like a couple with Todd Pletcher, we have a handful with Steve Asmussen, we have none with Chad Brown, we have none with Bob Baffert, we got a couple with Brad Cox. We have a lot more numbers wise with Greg Foley, Dale Romans, Cherie DeVoe. And I think it's because we don't want to compete with ourselves. We don't want to have horses in barns that are going to be third or fourth choice, as I was saying, to get into this allowance race or to get into this stakes race. It just makes more sense for us to diversify. And I just think it would make a lot more sense for other ownership groups to not have to compete with yourselves to get in races in a shrinking condition book, as Tank was talking about. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, and Tony, the only thing I would argue with you on your comments is that the other sports, yes, they're growing and they're growing exponentially, especially compared to our decreasing industry. They have revenue sharing, and revenue sharing, for their signals, allows the Pittsburgh Pirates of the world, in baseball, to stay afloat, and the Kansas City Royals of the world, and teams like that from the small market. So I understand what you're saying, but as far as a safety net for some of these organizations, the revenue sharing, I think, is really the reason why they're able to put other restrictions on other operations. But I'm digressing for a second. You mentioned Tom Ryan, and I'm going to use him as an example of somebody who drank the Kool-Aid. Okay, he is a big Baffert supporter, and look. Baffert's done right by their organization. There's no reason for him not to, be excited about it. Whether or not he sees the other side of the equation is a different argument, and you'd have to have that argument with him. But here's a perfect example of somebody who has all the winning cards in their hand. All Tom had to say was, "Hey, Tink, Bob Baffert has won, grade 1 races with less expensive horses." And he doesn't have to have the $1 million horse to win a race or the $2 million horse to win a race. And he could have cited examples, but he went too far. And I think in the argument with you, he wrote down all these horses that have won Triple Crown races and then tried to slide across saying, well, this horse only cost $1,000, Medina Spirit. This horse only cost a small amount of money, and you countered and said, well, let's backtrack for a second. This horse wasn't really $1,000. It was $30,000, which isn't a big significant. This horse wasn't no money, bought at the sale. They bought the horse for $900,000 the month before the Derby. So he had a winning hand. He just overplayed it by trying to say, my guy is so good that he's doing it with horses that cost $1,000. You don't have to say that. You just can say, my guy's really good. He's won all these races. And yes, he's won them with $1 million horses, but he's also won them with less expensive horses as well. And I think that's where, for me personally, that's where I get pissed off, because it's like you have to be able to see both sides of the argument, and you don't have to overplay your hand to impress me that Bob Baffert knows how to train horses. He does know how to train horses. But in this case, to use your term, Tink, I think Tom Ryan pushed the envelope of the argument, just like you've said that Bob Baffert pushes the envelope when he trains. Is that a fair? You were the one who was battling with him. Is that a fair argument?
Well, I'm a little bit inclined to be a little bit more kind to Tom, in part because of what I just said, which is that for many, many years, I've been critical of Baffert on different topics over a long period of time, and there are always reflexive supporters who come on and say, "Oh, that's nonsense. He's the best trainer ever," and they almost never argue with the substance of what I've said, but they try to defend or claim that I'm being ridiculous. I give Tom, I guess, the fact that Tom, I think, made a good faith effort to argue the substance of the matter. maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but I give him a lot of credit for that. That's very refreshing for me. And also, look, he's in a position in the industry. He's high profile. He's in a position in the industry. He's doing very well, where he doesn't have to argue with me about these kind of things. He can just completely ignore it. So I give him credit for those things. Yeah, I mean, I think he's a bit biased. I think he would admit, ultimately, maybe only privately, that sure, he's a bit biased. But I agree with you that from his standpoint, there's good reason to give horses to Bob Baffert. And this touches on another important point. There's a tendency for people to be critical without being thoughtful. Of course, this is typical of all social media, but it happens more specifically in the racing world, online, racing Twitter, et cetera. And people have this general impression that I only criticize Bob Baffert, or I only defend the Jockey Club. There's this wild, oversimplification of views that emanates from a lack of serious engagement. Typically, I am a fairly harsh critic of Bob Baffert in a number of areas, but he has been wildly successful. His record, for example, in the Derby, if you juxtapose it with Todd Pletcher's, has been extremely impressive. And if one is in the position of someone like Tom Ryan, there's no reason to argue that it's a mistake to give horses to Baffert. I'm not criticizing Tom Ryan. I'm much more in line with the criticisms that you and Joe made, being focused on the people that don't have the best stock, giving horses to those type of trainers. Because, and I've managed horses over the years, I would always prefer and make the argument to the owners who I worked with that they would be better off with smaller mid-level trainers, where those trainers' hands and eyes are on the horses every day. I know there are a lot of great assistants out there, some of whom end up becoming terrific trainers, but it's not the same. If you're giving a horse to Steve Asmussen or Bob Baffert or Todd Pletcher, there's a very good chance that for some period of time, at least, it's not going to be Todd or Bob or Steve who are feeling those legs every morning and interpreting the way the horse galloped or breezed. And if you have a trainer with 20, 30, 40 horses in their barn, it will be that trainer who is fully focused on your horses. I personally think that's a huge advantage and a big deal, because let's not pretend that the horses that end up running in graded stakes are not the rare exceptions. They're the rare exceptions. Right. The vast majority of horses, if they make it to the races, and if they're sound enough to actually have a decent length career, decent number of starts, how are they going to make their money? They're going to make their money for their owners by being developed to their full potential and managed properly. Now, who is more likely to do that with a horse that's intrinsically worth $40 or $50 or $75 or $100,000? Is it going to be a super trainer who's making millions a year and understandably is focused on their best horses? Or is it going to be the small to medium to mid-sized trainer? I'm completely with you guys on that.